Thanks everyone for joining us. I'm Jordan Rutter, Director of Public Relations at American Bird Conservancy. As your host, I have a few important notes to share with you before the main event. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted to our YouTube channel afterwards. Please submit any questions you have during the presentation using the Q&A box. We'll try to answer as many of those as we can during the question and answer portion at the end of our main program. I'm honored to have some incredible support in answering those questions in the chat box live during the program, thanks to Luca Savis, Outreach Associate for the Birds Not Mosquitoes Project, Julia Dignan of the Kauaʻi Forest Bird Recovery Project, and Erica Sanchez, our ABC webinar organizer. I'm excited to share that for the first time, we are providing live automated captions. You can turn them on by clicking on the up arrow next to the CC icon and clicking on Show Subtitles. Since this is an automated system, it might not be able to pick up all of the words, so I apologize in advance for any inaccuracies. I also want to apologize in advance for any native Hawaiian words or bird names that I mispronounce. Please do let us know how the captions worked for you in the post-webinar survey that will be sent out via email. Next slide, please. Before our main event, I wanted to share some background on American Bird Conservancy, shortened to ABC, which was founded in 1994 with the mission of protecting wild birds across the Americas. We continue that work today following a conservation strategy outlined by the pyramid featured on the current slide. Our work strives to help keep common birds common and prevent the rarest species from going extinct. Today's webinar falls into the red colored top level of this pyramid, given the severity of endangerment and threats that these Hawaiian birds are facing. This webinar is special and different from other ABC webinars. We won't have a seminar style or PowerPoint presentation, but rather a screening of a short film that ABC helped produce. Then we'll have a discussion with experts who are in the field and working directly to save these birds. So without further ado, let me introduce you to our panelists. We have Dr. Lisa Callie Crampton, who has been the Kauaʻi Forest Bird Recovery Project's leader since April of 2010, overseeing research into the ecology and conservation of Kauaʻi's native forest birds. She obtained her PhD in ecology, evolution, and conservation biology from the University of Nevada at Reno. Her first professional experience in Hawaii was at the USGS Kilauea Field Station on Hawaii Island, where she analyzed field data on the endangered sand teal to improve monitoring and management strategies implemented by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Subsequently, for the U.S. Forest Service, she analyzed impacts of recreation on wildlife in the Sierra Nevada before finding her way back to Hawaii in her current capacity. Dr. Chris Farmer is American Bird Conservancy's Hawaii Program Director. Chris has worked on Hawaiian birds since 2004. In addition to Hawaiian forest bird ecology and behavior, his research on the island of Hawaii addresses the impacts of invasive species and forest regeneration and growth. He received a BS in zoology from the University of California, Davis, and a PhD in ecology, evolution, and marine biology from the University of California, Santa Barbara. His dissertation focused on host, habitat, and landscape factors affecting the distribution of brown-headed cowbirds in California. Ian Nelson is the filmmaker of the video that we'll be viewing. He is a documentary filmmaker residing in Santa Rosa, California, and focusing on wildlife conservation and environmental research. His work highlights the importance of biodiversity and the incredible efforts from conservationists and scientists in hopes to promote more sustainable ways of living and establish healthier ecosystems. Dr. Jace Saplin is an assistant professor of music at the University of Hawaii. Unfortunately, Jace cannot be with us today, but in our post-webinar email, we'll be sharing some of the resources related to his perspective and expertise on Native Hawaiian culture, arts, and birds. So without further ado, we'll get set up for the film screening.
There are 8 forest bird species currently still in existence on Kauaʻi. We have the puaiohi, the akikiki, and the akeke, the anianiao, the Kauaʻi amakihi, the Kauaʻi alapaio, the iiwi, and the apapane. The puaiohi and the akikiki number fewer than 500 individuals in the wild, and the akake numbers fewer than 1,000 individuals. These birds occur nowhere else in the whole wide world. The birds are the cultural engine of Hawaii. They're the spiritual engine of Hawaii, and they're the environmental engine that keeps everything going here. Avian malaria and avian pox is spread by mosquitoes, which are also introduced to Kauaʻi. These two diseases are really affecting the honey creepers in particular. They are highly susceptible to these avian diseases. The things that the birds need to do to adapt are not present in their genome, and they have to learn to cope behaviorally and through other mechanisms. Both mosquitoes and the plasmodium, which is the agent of the disease itself that lives in the blood of the birds, require warm temperatures in order to complete their life cycles. So as temperatures on the islands rise, these diseases are becoming more prevalent. We are working with partners at the U.S. Geological Survey to trial a new method of controlling mosquito larvae in the streams. We're focusing our efforts on the streams, which we think are the primary source of the mosquito larvae. So we're going along the streams, dipping into those little margins and those little puddles on the edge to see if we can find larvae, and we're going to do this before and after the application of the bacterial larvicide to see if we are successful at reducing those larvae in those stream margins. The first thing that we have tried is a local control, which is a biopesticide called Bacillus thuringiensis israelensis, or BTI. It's a naturally occurring bacteria that kills larvae of mosquitoes and midges very specifically in streams or in water sources, and it does not affect any other native invertebrates or any vertebrate species such as birds, mammals, or even humans. So it's very safe to use. The forests of Kauaʻi used to go almost all the way down to sea level, and we cleared them to make room for our human activities. And so that was the first impact on squishing the range of the forest birds. But then as this disease cycle has kicked in over the last few decades, we've seen an even further range contraction because the birds have moved upslope and upslope and upslope to the cooler, higher elevation plateau in the middle of Kauaʻi, where they have had a refuge from mosquito-borne diseases. However, with climate change, it has meant that the temperatures in those refuges have increased, and those refuges are no longer refuges. The birds are no longer safe from mosquitoes and malaria. This loss of those refuges means that we have to treat mosquitoes in those high elevation areas. So we can use this in the short term to control mosquitoes locally. In the long term, however, we need to figure out how we can control mosquitoes at the landscape scale. And so to do that, we're turning to another biopesticide, another bacteria called Wolbachia. Wolbachia naturally occurs in the guts of insects throughout Hawaii. So the idea is that we will rear male mosquitoes in labs and inject them with a different strain of Wolbachia than wild females carry, and release them in large numbers across the landscape so that most of the females would end up with inviable eggs, and we would have suppressed the mosquito population through birth control. The goal is to help the birds not only maintain their foothold in this refuge, but begin to expand their range, see their populations grow, and really recover so that we have them forever.
That was so powerful. Thank you, everyone. We'll now move into the panelist conversation and Q&A portion of the event. So we'll try to get through as many as we can. And friendly reminder that we are recording this webinar. There will be a follow-up email to all registrants with the recording, reference links, and more information. You can also always check out our website or contact us if you still have follow-up questions. As we transition, we're going to start with a few questions that came in during the webinar registration, and then we'll take some of the live questions that are coming in. So without further ado, Callie, can you give us an update on the current situation in Kauaʻi?
Certainly. Thank you very much, Jordan, for this introduction. And thanks again, Ian, for the film. And thanks to all of you who have signed in today. I'll try to do this without crying because the news is not good. So sorry. At the end of the film, we were talking about the birds recovering and expanding, but to be honest, right now we are faced potentially with the immediate extinction of one of those charming species that was featured so prominently in that film, the akikiki. Since Ian started working with us to film this species and to film the other birds in this film, we have observed the number of territories in the heart of the akikiki's range, and the akikiki is the bird over this shoulder. The number of territories in the heart of its range has gone from 35 territories in 2015 to only 3 territories this year, and 2 of those didn't have a female on them. There was really only 1 breeding pair at Halapakai, the core of the bird's range. Now, so this is very grim news because it is the core of the range. It is not the total number of birds left in the wild. Do not get that impression. There are other smaller concentrations of the bird throughout the Alakai Plateau. But we are really, really worried currently about the fate of this species in the wild and are spending a lot of time in emergency meetings. Meanwhile, we have seen the numbers of mosquitoes increase on the plateau. We used to only see them in the fall months at the lower elevations during the filming of this movie, for example. But now we see them year round, even at the higher elevations, such as this Halapa'akai site, the core of the bird's range. So we know that we're seeing the birds decrease and the mosquitoes increase. And, of course, we just have to link those 2 events and really ascribe these changes to mosquito-borne diseases.
Thank you, Kelly. The next question that we have, it's very difficult to move on from that, Kelly. Chris, can you take this one? It's, do any or all of these devastating issues apply to other Hawaiian islands? The video and the topic at hand is Kauaʻi, but are other Hawaiian islands also vulnerable? And is there anything that individuals can do?
Thanks, Jordan, and thank you everyone for attending the video. It's incredibly powerful, and I've been working with Callie for many years to try and save these species. Unfortunately, the problem that Ian documents so well in this video is happening across the state. Hawaii has no native mosquitoes. Before humans arrived, there were none here, and there was no avian malaria. And so all of these factors are affecting birds throughout the islands. And that's why if you go to Oahu or Honolulu or Molokai or some of the other low islands, you won't see native birds because avian malaria and mosquitoes already wiped them out. And the problems that were just documented that Callie talked about with the current low populations of akikiki, which is what she has on her screen, or KKA, which is what's over my left shoulder, are due to the avian malaria. The same problems are happening on Maui. Is the kiwikiu or Maui parrotbill has 150 odd birds, but likely less. We can't find them anymore in the lower parts of their elevation, or the lower elevation parts of their range. And a koʻi, another bird on Maui, is also declining quite rapidly. I live on the island of Hawaii, and the mosquitoes are bad here, but we are much higher than those other 2 islands. So the birds seem to be at least holding on for a little bit. But now these species that we're talking about, as Callie mentioned, the kikiki have very low numbers, and there are more mosquitoes breeding in these areas than there are birds. And similarly on Maui. So we're at the point where there are more mosquitoes than birds, and so some of these species can get wiped out with 100 mosquito bites. The problem, or the solution that Callie mentioned at the end of that, the Wolbachia, is incredibly promising and has been used extensively around the world for human health. And so there's a group of us, the Birds Not Mosquito group at ABC and Hawaii Forest Birds, a lot of the conservation partners, total of 12 organizations in Hawaii, are working to bring the solution to the landscape and save these birds at the landscape scale. And so it sounds depressing. I do feel Callie's emotions too. It's hard, but there's hope. And so that's the encouraging part, is that there is hope to solve these problems and to save these birds.
Thanks, Chris. Ian, can you tell us a little bit more about the film itself? How difficult was it to find the birds, but also from a videoing perspective? And just, can you share a little bit more about the process of shooting this film?
Yeah, absolutely. It's, pretty difficult to get to these spots where these forest birds are, and they're really removed from, the more accessible parts of the island. And so we had to hike in and spent just, I think, one night or 2 nights up at a campsite up there. And I was working with Justin, who's also in the film, and we were communicating. He was able to go looking for some of the birds while I was filming scenic shots or seeing if I could see any birds myself. And he notified me when he did spot a pair of hakikiki, and it's really special to experience that and to have filmed that. And it's really sad to know that their populations aren't doing well. And I just hope that, we can do everything that we can to reverse that. And, I am incredibly fortunate to have had that experience and to, meet Callie and everybody who's working really hard on the efforts. It's a lot of work and it's difficult terrain to work in. It's, a really wet terrain, very, hilly, slopey. You never, you have to watch your footing. So that in itself is a challenge. And then, to actually find the birds and then get to a spot where you can be close enough to film them is another challenge. And I just feel very fortunate to have had that experience.
Thanks, Ian. Callie, in the video, you briefly mentioned that these birds specifically are the, quote, cultural engine of Hawaii. Can you tell us a little bit more about that phrase and the cultural significance of these species?
Sure, I'd love to. So the birds are really inspirational. I think you all noticed how brightly colored they are. Yellows and reds and oranges, and many of you may not know that the Hawaiian Islands have no precious stones. Just the geological history of the Hawaiian Islands did not lend itself to the formation of precious stones. So the ali'i, or the royalty in Hawaii, adorn themselves instead with the beautiful, brightly colored feathers of these birds. And that's the sort of historical cultural significance. So they made helmets and standards and capes to sort of assert their status with these beautiful, brightly colored feathers in the absence of having gemstones to use. So we call these birds the jewels of the forest. But it's not just a historical cultural significance. They're still tremendously important to the mythology and the literature and the lore. They've spawned proverbs that guide Hawaiian ways of thinking and continue to inspire us today. So for example, Kauaʻi Forest Birds has a motto, "Go inquire of the birds," which comes from a Hawaiian proverb. And it means when you need an answer, go and look to these animals, which the Hawaiians considered to be the messengers between gods and people. And so they're really important that way. And today, they continue to inspire halau, which are hula groups here in the Hawaiian Islands. They are developing new and contemporary mele and hula and oli, so chants and songs and dances based on the birds. And they are inspiring contemporary pieces of music and art. For example, the Symphony of the Hawaiian Birds that we helped to put together and host a number of years ago, which features artwork and videos and music, and inspiring lots and lots of school children to also understand and appreciate nature in the Hawaiian Islands. And I think when we have an opportunity to, well, and of course this film that Ian has put together, and when we have an opportunity later to talk to Jace, he'll be able to expand on that a little more.
Thank you. Chris, would you mind explaining more about the Wolbachia project, what that means, how it's going? Just, it's quite a mouthful of a word. So maybe you can just explain that a little bit more.
Of course, it's a very complicated project, and I'm so immersed in it, sometimes I do skip over the important details. And as Kelly mentioned it in the film, it works basically as a mosquito birth control. Is you take a bacteria that's incredibly common, roughly 60% of all insects have this, and you put it into a mosquito, and if it has a different strain of that bacteria, it can't successfully breed with the wild mosquitoes. And you release male mosquitoes. So males don't bite, only females bite people. And you release males with this new strain of Wolbachia. And this is done, as I said, quite widely for human health. In the United States, it's being done along the East Coast. There are 21 states in DC that are doing this for a different species of mosquito. There's a group in Fresno that is doing this at the county level that is having millions and millions of mosquitoes that are being released. It's also being done worldwide. And in all these cases, they're showing incredible success at reducing the population of mosquitoes, 90+% in some cases. And so this is a way of reducing the population of mosquitoes that transmit those avian diseases. So we can create barriers and protect these birds in the wild. And my hope, is that we can eventually start moving down the mountains and have the habitat for these birds increase. And in time, even have them on some of those islands that currently do not have any, such as Oahu or Lanai. There's a lot of technological details that we're working on solving that we almost have done. There's still the implementation of how you get the drones or helicopters or people out in the forest and exactly what the implementation schedule is going to be. But we have some really smart modelers working on this, and she's doing great. And we have groups on both Kauaʻi and Maui who are working on the application areas and working on the other major component of it is the regulatory. There's a lot of permits. It's considered a biopesticide, so you deal with the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency. But I've had meetings with them and they're incredibly supportive, and they realize that this is the conservation crisis for the United States and that they can be the ones making a difference. And so they are eager and waiting for the permit to be submitted. So I feel really strong about the support we're getting from them. Then the third component is the public engagement. There's a lot of people, unfortunately, don't know about these Hawaiian forest birds. Wondering why we're doing this webinar. Is people come to Hawaii, and even a lot of the people who live here never get up into the forest and see birds like KKA or Kikiki or Elapai, or even the more common ones like Eevee or Apapane. And that's unfortunate. They see the birds in Honolulu and think those are the native birds, but as Callie in the film showed, we have these incredible jewels of the forest that no one knows about. So we're talking to people and explaining why they're so valuable and why they're so important to save. And that support and all those outreach, that's something that Luca has been leading on. She's been doing great. We have a bunch of social media, and we're meeting with local community leaders and politicians. So we're working on all three of those different tracks: the technological, the regulatory, and the public engagement to get this implemented. We've unfortunately, Callie and the team that's on Maui they do incredible work. They're out there so hard, but we have only a limited amount of time. So we have a couple years, 2-5 years, something like that, to save these birds. So we are working and doing everything we can to promote and get this tool approved for deployment at the landscape scale.
Thanks, Chris. Callie, maybe you want to speak to what the registrants or viewers of this webinar can do, or maybe shouldn't do, especially when you talk about both in terms of the folks that live in Hawaii, tourists that visit the state, and then folks like myself in Washington, D.C. that are very far away but want to help too.
Sure, and maybe I'll start with the last part of your question, because it's something I want to emphasize, and maybe it didn't come out as clearly in the film as I would have liked to, which is that this is entirely a climate change driven process. So the reason why the mosquitoes are able to invade into the mountains and this Plasmodium, that's the agent of malaria, is able to complete its life cycle in these warmer temperatures is because climate change is allowing for warmer temperatures at higher elevations. And so the most important thing that any of you can do, no matter where you are, is take measures to mitigate your climate footprint. And that's really easy, right? It's with things we all know to do. Turn out the lights, turn off the fan, don't leave your car idling while you're waiting to pick up your kid at school, ride your bike, take public transport, and of course, support any measures being taken by your local, state, and federal governments to deal with the climate change crisis. I mean, that's the key message that has to come away from this, is that anything else we do is short-term until we deal with climate change. That being said, if you're in the Hawaiian Islands in particular, you can do a lot to control mosquitoes locally around your backyard, in your garden, by making sure you're not doing anything to breed mosquitoes with standing water left around, buckets, the kinds of vegetation you select, et cetera, et cetera. So there are measures that people can take while living here in the Hawaiian Islands. And of course, while visiting the Hawaiian Islands, the same things apply if you happen to be camping or renting a cabin up in Koke'e here on Kauaʻi and you notice standing water, please do something about it. And there are other threats to the birds too that this film doesn't highlight that we can all be mindful of while we are out and about in the Hawaiian Islands, such as introducing even more pests. So please be sure that you are cleaning your gear as you move from island to island and site to site within the island, so that you're not spreading this new threat, Rapadohia death, you're not spreading seeds, et cetera, et cetera. All those things will help change the trajectory for the birds.
Can I add one thing to Kelly's answer? Is, yeah, again, we're so immersed in this, we forget that climate change in Hawaii is not hypothetical. We deal with it every day. We see the effects every day. And we've known about the mosquitoes and avian disease problem for a long time. The early researchers here documented the lack of forest birds down low. But after decades of seeing it happen, it's happening much quicker than we expected. The climate change effects of allowing the mosquitoes and the malarial parasite to move up they just happen much quicker. And so there are these huge events of mosquito outbreaks, and they're overwhelming the forest birds, so that you have a pulse of mosquitoes that is thousands, tens of thousands maybe, and you only have 100 birds. So it can be really huge impacts at the population level. But I want to get back to the hope. As someone who's worked in Hawaii for as long as we have, to finally have a solution is just game changing. This is really encouraging and energizing. So we're so close to getting all the pieces in place to save the Hawaiian forest birds that no one's stopping. I mean, we're all going incredibly hard because we know that we're just so close. And that's what motivates, I think, me at least, but I think all of us, is that we've known for decades that this problem was coming, but now we have the ability to solve it.
And so on that note, one of the things that we at Kauaʻi Forest Birds are spending most of our time doing right now is documenting where and when we find mosquitoes. Because when we go to release these males that have this different strain of Wolbachia that has been injected into them in the lab, we need to inject them where we know mosquito populations are the most abundant. And so we also encourage anybody working on Kauaʻi or visiting Kauaʻi who finds huge pools of stagnant water with larvae in them to reach out to us and give us a good description, ideally with a GPS, but whatever they can, good photos or whatever, to let us know where these breeding sources of mosquitoes are so that we can target them for immediate control with that first tool that we talked about, the BTI, because it's just a pellet that we put in water to kill mosquito larvae. And then long-term to help us guide this Wolbachia effort. That's also a really important thing that people can do to help.
Those are all great. And I'm sure that telling a friend is also something that at least I can do back here on the East Coast, just to help spread the word. Friendly reminder that we are recording this and we'll definitely be sending it out. There will be a link to the recording for you to tell a friend as well, along with a lot of resources and all of the ways that you can help. But Ian, I wanted to go over to you because I think another thing that is helping these birds is art, and film, of course, is a mode of art. So can you just speak to the importance of the film in general, your vision for helping these birds in conservation.
Yeah, I mean, I think art always has an important role to play in conservation. And, you know, as Callie mentioned, there's been a tradition in the Hawaiian culture of using the birds' feathers. And so there's always been an art form in human culture depicting things of beauty. And we find these birds to be a thing of beauty. And so with modern forms of art, video, there's so much information going around. And I think one of the best things that we can do is see these visuals of these beautiful species and inspire people to want to see them for themselves, to be able to go out and see akeke and elapaio and all these birds for themselves. I think, this form of art can help kind of give people that desire. And so that's my hope, is that it inspires people to want to go out and see and learn things for themselves. And in knowing that these birds are threatened, we really have to do something in order to keep their populations going and to try to revitalize the populations so that people can get out there and see them for their own eyes. So.
Thank you, Ian. So what the three of you have said has completely resonated with our live audience right now. Folks are commenting and asking questions that are saying, how do we help even more? The situation is so dire. How do we help you expedite the deployment of the Wolbachia projects and mosquitoes? How do we help get some of the bureaucracy and red tape that might be preventing progress? So Chris, I don't know if you want to speak to any expected time frame, and then again, how people could help support you.
Sure. The time frame is, we're hoping to submit the first necessary permit by later this year and work on getting the preliminary trials done in 2022, and hopefully by 2023 having it at a kind of more of a demonstration, small scale test out on the landscape, and by 2024 having it at the full landscape on both East Maui, which is where Kiwikiu and Kauaʻi live, and then also up in the Alakai where the birds we've been focused on today live. Because we recognize that none of our birds can go extinct anymore. And so we are going to be moving forward on both islands to prevent that. As far as how to help, I mean, whenever there are regulatory hearings, the public testimony is huge. That is incredible. And the last one, we had over 140 comments that were all positive, and the board acknowledged that, and they approved the import permit. And so Kauaʻi Forest Birds and the Birds Not Mosquitoes team, as those hearings come up, make sure and let the public know, so that public testimony is a huge benefit. We are trying to expedite things even further. That's why I was talking with the EPA the other day. So trying to get things to move faster. One of the big things is just going to be resources. It's complicated to get into, but Hawaii has about 1/3 of all the endangered birds and more if you want to start talking endangered plants and insects for the US, but we get 4 to 5% of the resources. So we just don't have the money. Callie's team doesn't have the resources to go out and do all the bird and mosquito work. We don't have the facilities to produce all the mosquitoes. There is actually a massive bill in front of Congress right now called the Recovering American Wildlife. It's bipartisan in both the House and the Senate, and it is incredible because they use a formula based upon the number of endangered species. So Hawaii has tremendous resources in that bill. So if that passes, then we'll have the funds necessary to start doing this, because Fish and Wildlife Service, the state, all the local partners have acknowledged that this is the conservation crisis and that we are the generation that can save these birds. And so if we have those resources, we can start to build the facilities and get the teams out to deploy the mosquitoes. And so right now we are in talks. I'm trying to figure out what I can say to try and get some resources. And I suspect that once the logjam breaks, we'll start to move very, very quickly. So please stay tuned on the social media platforms, and we'll announce things as soon as those opportunities present. Oh, Luca, thank you so much. That's exactly what I was thinking about. And so Luca just put in the chat the Recovering America's Wildlife Act, and that has a huge upside for Hawaii, especially.
Thanks, Chris. I also, I am on social media, but want to reassure our audience that you can also get all of this on our website or in email format as well, just in case you're not on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook. So definitely there are lots of ways to stay in touch and get the information that we've been referencing. Ian, one of the things that I want to go back to, we're talking about how to help these birds and everything, especially since you film them. Can you talk about any ethics around giving birds these space? We want to all see them now. I personally have never even been to Hawaii. I want to see these birds, but I also know that I want to help them. So can you speak to that aspect of how to observe these birds while being ethical?
Yeah, and I think that's really important. A lot of times I feel like we want to get the shot or get the footage for the purposes of sharing it, and sometimes we don't consider going to the animal as we're doing that. And I think it's really important to be respectable to the species that you're encountering and not making it feel like it's threatened and like it needs to fly away to escape, because that could create more problems than you're realizing. So yeah, I think it's really important to be patient. I mean, you'll be surprised how much can happen if you're just patient and being in one spot in a forest. You'll see so much life come through that one spot. So I think that's a really important aspect to it. And then you just get to be able to observe these species in a more calm state where they're, the akikiki, for instance, were just going about their day, going on the branches, picking at the branches and just doing their normal routine. So yeah, it's just really special to experience that.
Thanks, Ian. So another question that's coming in various ways is regarding saving these birds through either captive rearing or captive housing. Callie, maybe you can speak to any just success stories or how that factors into the rescue plans for these birds.
Sure, thank you. And I did see all those, like 6 or 7 of those come in. So in 2015, recognizing already that the akikiki and the akike'e were on downwards trajectories, we began a conservation breeding project with partners at San Diego Zoo. They've changed their name. San Diego Zoo Wildlife Association, or Alliance, I think is their current name, and the state of Hawaii and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to collect eggs of these 2 species, bring the eggs into conservation breeding facilities, hatch them, rear them out, and hope that those birds would start producing offspring. And we knew from the outset that we would have, based on their biology, likely more success with the akikiki than the akike'e. The akikiki's nests are easier to find than the akike'e, for example. And that is, in fact, what did pan out. So over a 4-year period, we were able to collect about 45 or more, slightly more than that, akikiki eggs, most of which hatched. And so we ended up with a founding population of about 45 akikiki. However, we found far fewer akike'e eggs, maybe at half that or fewer, and they had lower hatching success. So the founding population of akike'e was only 12 individuals. And subsequently, akikiki have gone on to produce 5 offspring in captivity, which means that basically they've managed to replace the adults that have passed on. So the size of the population is still about the same. Whereas Akeke has not yet bred successfully in captivity, and the current size of the population is 8 birds. And so the good news is that even if these species go extinct in the wild, technically we do still have representatives of both of them in captivity. Our fear, however, is that these birds are aging, and until we can get them to start reproducing at a higher rate, those populations will decline further as the wild population continues to decline, and perhaps our insurance policy isn't as robust as we had once hoped it would be. If there are more questions about that, I'm happy to take them too.
Yeah, I will keep an eye out for those. But I do want to transition back to Chris, who did such a great job talking about Wolbachia. A lot of folks are now asking why, not necessarily why are you focusing on mosquitoes, but what are you doing for the birds themselves? Are there vaccines? Are there things other than the captive aspects that are being done to help save these birds? So maybe you can just speak to if vaccines are vaccines for these specific diseases for the birds, if those are possible.
Those are all really good questions. Yeah, I've been trying to keep an eye on the chat, but Luca and Julia are doing a great job there. The short answer is it's complicated. Avian malaria, as you would gather from the name, is very similar to human malaria, and we don't have a vaccine for that. We are standing on the shoulders of billions of dollars spent on human health. That's where Wolbachia comes from, and a lot of the techniques we're using. So we are really lucky in that sense. But we don't have a vaccine. And even if you did have a vaccine, you'd have to get the bird and catch it and give it one or multiple shots, and not to be too real, but think about something like COVID, where it's just a hard thing to get people vaccinated. There are medicines that you can give prophylactically, so preventatively, for birds. And that is something we've done with other species, that whenever you capture them, if they're suffering the effects, if they have lethargy and they seem to be suffering from malaria, you can give them these medicines, but it takes, I think it's 7 days or 14 days, Kat. I don't know if you remember off the top of your head how long you have to give it, but it is a long period of captivity. So you have to, in that example, capture all the birds, hold them for 7 to 10, 14 days, whatever it is I said, I don't remember that date, and give them these medicines on a regular basis. So that is a huge capture and infrastructure approach. Another side, the flip side of that, is that there are a lot of other diseases that are vectored by mosquitoes. You have things such as West Nile, you have avian pox that is helped by mosquitoes. So if you get rid of the mosquitoes, you help with all these other diseases as well. And so that's why I've been focusing on the mosquitoes versus the disease. Based upon the human experience with getting rid of human malaria, it's just a very tough thing to do. But it seems like the mosquito is the weak spot in the disease transmission cycle.
Thanks, Chris. I'm just trying to sift through some of the other questions coming in right now. One is, are there other ways to control mosquitoes that are being explored as possible solutions? One person asked about native bat species and conservation efforts to help them. I don't know if any of you can speak to that, but basically, are there other things being done to help these birds other than putting all of our eggs in one basket with Wolbachia and the mosquitoes?
Yes, I'll go first. I was waiting to see if Callie wanted to jump in. We are doing a lot of different things. On Kauaʻi, Callie and Dofa have been working to do road improvements, which she can talk about some to get rid of wallows and not wallows, breeding sites. The reason I said wallows is because on the Big Island where I live, pigs are one of the major sources of wallows. So if you fence the habitat and get rid of the pigs, you prevent them from creating breeding sites for mosquitoes. So you have a win-win-win-win-win. You get rid of these non-native mammals that are destroying the habitat, and you also reduce the population of mosquitoes on the landscape. So by doing that, you're really helping out. You also reduce the incidence of rapid ohia death, which is a fungus that comes in whenever pigs or another animal damages ohia trees. So protecting the habitat is really critical. One of the yeah, it's kind of weird to talk about advantages in this situation, but mosquitoes first arrived in Hawaii in 1826. On an ecological timescale, that's not enough to be integrated into any of the food webs or ecosystems. So some of the native insects and the native bat do eat them, but they're generalists. They are not specialized on this, so that you can suppress or remove the mosquitoes without having any ramifications or knock-on effects, because they're not part of the native Hawaiian ecosystems. And then Kat,
Thank you.
other thoughts you wanted to add in? Specific
Yeah.
to Kauaʻi?
So thank you. I mean, what we can do right now is control mosquito breeding habitat. And it is a very important tool. It will help the birds. It will make all of us enjoying the high country in Hawaii more comfortable, because it should not just take care of the Culex mosquitoes, but the Aedes mosquitoes, which are important vectors of human diseases and also just a miserable thing to deal with when you're trying to enjoy your hike. And we have this tool at our disposal, this dunk, this BTI tool, this granular powder that we can put in breeding sources if we can't mechanically fill them or doing other things. But really, the important steps that can be taken at this time really do focus on larval breeding sources. And as far as the bat goes, the one and only bat we have in Hawaii is a tree roosting bat that hangs from branches. It's not a cavity roosting branch or cavity roosting bat. So I do not think that bat houses would be particularly beneficial for that species.
Thank you. Not to shift gears too much, but Chris, your mention of invasive species really highlights the opportunity to talk about other threats to Hawaii as well. I don't know if you want to speak to some of the largest threats that are there.
That is a large question, Jordan.
I know.
Hawaii, because we're one of the most remote archipelagos in the world, we have an incredible set of ecosystems from sea level up to the highest peaks. But as an island, we are really susceptible to invasive species. So anytime invasive species get here, they can really take hold and race through the native systems. And we have things such as pigs and sheep and goats that are non-native mammals that destroy the habitat. We have non-native insects like mosquitoes, but also ants, and most bees are non-native. So we have these insects that destroy the food webs from the bottom side. And then we also have humans, which converted a lot of the habitat to pastures for cattle and for other needs, so that we've had continuing stresses on the environment for generations. And so it is the accumulation of all those effects that we are trying to correct and trying to save the birds. So there are a lot of invasive species, a lot of non-native species. And that's one thing that's really just precious when you get up into the Kauaʻi or Hakalau or some of these native forests, is you have a majority of native plants and insects and birds, and it's incredibly different, just special compared to what you have down at sea level, where it's almost all non-natives.
Thanks, Chris. Callie, I'm going to go back over to you, and let's focus on those amazing native birds. Can you tell us just a little bit more about the species that we've been talking about? What are their food sources? Just what do you find most interesting? And not to trivialize it, but are there any fun facts or things that really stand out about these species that you can tell us, especially for people like myself that haven't observed them?
Sure. I mean, first of all, I think one thing to understand is they're all so distinct and they all have these different personality traits. So as I mentioned in the film, on Kauaʻi, we still have 8 native species of forest birds, which is down from 13 even in recent memory, and probably 24 in pre-Polynesian times. These 8 species are all endemic to the Hawaiian Islands. So they're found in Hawaii, nowhere else in the world. And 6 of those 8 are found on Kauaʻi, nowhere else in the world. The only 2 species that are found on the other Hawaiian Islands are the Eevee, which is poking over your shoulder, and the Apapane, which is the other bright red bird. Those ones are found statewide. And those species, along with 4 other species on Kauaʻi are all honey creepers. They're this Hawaiian honey creeper lineage that arrived in the Hawaiian Islands. Their ancestor was a finch. And in the absence of mammalian predators, in the absence of mammalian competitors and reptilian competitors and all these other species, they flourished and expanded to fill all these multifarious niches that no one else was occupying in the Hawaiian Islands. And so they diversified into this array of colors that you've seen in the film, but I don't know if you've also noticed, they also have a crazy array of beak types because they all were specializing on different food sources. So the Evie poking over your shoulder is a nectar specialist. Somebody had put that in the chat. It specializes on tubular flowers in particular, where its beak is a perfect match for the shape of the tubular flower. The Akike'e poking over Chris's shoulder is a crossbill. I think you can actually see that. Its bill is like this. And what it likes to do is it likes to get into the leaf nodes of the ohia and pop them open and search for grubs. So Akike and Akikiki on my screen are 2 of our endangered species on Kauaʻi, with Akikiki numbering probably at this point in time about 100 individuals or fewer, and Akike numbering 1,000 individuals or fewer. The Akikiki is a gleaner. It likes to crawl along the branches and the trunks, looking underneath lichen and mosses for grubs. And there was some really great footage that Ian captured in the film of it shaking at a caterpillar after it had caught it. And they stomp on the caterpillars and they pull them apart and they stretch them just like silly string. I mean, they're really fun. And they are very acrobatic. They like to hang upside down, sort of like a trapeze artist. Staying in the honey creeper family, we have 2 other honey creepers on Kauaʻi, trying to keep my math right. The Kauaʻi amakihi, which is related to the rest of the amakihi across the Hawaiian Islands, but is its own species. And it has the biggest beak of all of the amakihis. And it likes to drill into wood to get food. It likes to nectar feed. It likes to nectar rob. It's just a generalist species. In general, the amakihis seem to be developing resistance to avian malaria. We are not sure that that is the case on Kauaʻi because this amakihis numbers are dropping precipitously at like 90% a year. So we're a little bit worried about that species too. There are only 8,000 of them left on Kauaʻi. And then the last honey creeper, and I probably shouldn't say this because it's not endangered, but it's my favorite. Julia, I think, had it up earlier. It's the anianiao. It's the reason why it's my favorite is nothing other than its bright lemon drop yellow color. It is just this little happy smiley face bird flitting through the forest. There it is. And it is the smallest honey creeper. It weighs like as much as 10 paper clips or 4 pennies. So put that in your hand and you'll get a sense of how small this bird is. And then I just need to quickly mention our 2 non-honey creeper species, the Elapaio, shown by Ian, which is an aerial insectivore. It catches insects on the wing, as somebody mentioned in the chat. It is the only species whose populations are quite stable and quite numerous. And we think that that's because it's not particularly susceptible to avian malaria. Its biggest predator is rats, which I don't think we've talked about at all yet. We can, and if you want. And then Chris, thank you, Chris, has popped up a puaiohi on his screen. And puaiohi is a Myodestes thrush. It is the other endangered species on Kauaʻi. It has always been rare. There are about 500 of them. There have been about 500 of them for as long as anyone seems to know. And it again is probably more resilient to avian malaria than the honey creeper species, but very susceptible to rat predation. And it's quite different from all the other birds. Not only is it not a honey creeper, it's a cavity nester. It doesn't nest in trees. It's the only species we have on our island that doesn't nest in trees. It nests in little alcoves or crannies along cliff faces, along the streams of the Alakai, and it is our only remaining frugivore or fruit eater on Kauaʻi, and so is very important for seed dispersal and regeneration of the forest.
Thank you so much. Oh, I can't wait to go see those one day.
Well, and I'm just so happy for everyone for providing the props for me as I was speaking, so thank you, everybody.
So Ian, everyone is loving your film and wants more. So can you share a little bit more about where you have shown this film, and then if you have any future bird or conservation oriented projects that people can follow and watch?
Yeah, well, so this short video is a part of two. There's another one that goes a little bit into detail about other threats that aren't concerning mosquitoes to the forest birds, and I think those are both found on the Kauaʻi Forest Bird Recovery Project's website. And then I think we will have these films available on YouTube as well. And there should be some short clips on social media to promote the full length piece. And I've had the opportunity to film another feature-length film about the seabird on Kauaʻi and the conservation efforts for the native seabirds, and that can be found on YouTube as well. It's on I believe Coriolis Films YouTube channel, and what else? There's a lot going on. Yeah, I just finished a new documentary that I'm starting to get out, and we'll see. I don't have a platform for it yet, but we'll see where it ends up. And that one is more focused on fires in California, which is just happening more and more each year. Fires happening right now. So yeah, and I hope that answers that question. And thank you to everyone who sent your comments in. I really appreciate it. Yeah, I'm glad to have this out there.
Thank you so much for sharing it with us. Unfortunately, our time is coming to an end, but we're going to have one final question for all of the speakers to comment on. And that question is, what is one thing you hope that everyone that has watched this webinar takes away and goes and shares with a friend? So Callie, I'll start with you.
The birds matter. They matter so much to us here in the Hawaiian Islands as just inspiration, and they're economic drivers here, they're environmental drivers here. Like I said earlier, without the birds, we have no forests. And it's within our power to save the birds, and it's also our responsibility to save the birds because we put them in this mess. And each one of you, as I said earlier, has a role to play in saving the birds, including sharing with a friend this pickle, this predicament that they're in, so that everyone starts taking individual and public actions to save them.
Thanks, Callie. Ian?
Yeah, I just hope, that again, this inspires people to want to go out, experience nature for themselves, learn a little bit about their local wildlife that's out there, maybe some species that are threatened or near threatened in their area, and also just to appreciate the environment and work to sustain it and to help these species recover, and especially on Hawaii and Kauaʻi, we need to do everything we can to keep these species intact, because if one species goes out, there's a ripple effect for the whole ecosystem. So
thanks, Ian. And Chris?
Sometimes it's hard. We in Hawaii, all of us on this call, are immersed with these facts daily. And I know a lot of people reading the chat is kind of, from anytime I've explained to other people on the mainland, they're a little bit taken aback by how real extinction is here. Several of us saw po'uli go extinct, and several of us are watching other species decline. But it's not hopeless. The thing I really want to communicate is that the reason we're giving our lives and we're so committed is because there is hope. We can save these birds, is that we are making a difference. And we is that larger we, that you on this call who are interested, who are engaged, is we are making a difference and we are going to save these birds. There is hope.
There's the phrase that hope is the thing with feathers. And I think that the three of you, and I know all of our coworkers and partner organizations definitely help prove that. So I just want to thank Callie, Chris, Ian, thank you so much for all that you do. Please pass that on to all of our coworkers in Hawaii. Thank you to all of our webinar participants and viewers. Thank you for all of your thoughtful questions and comments. We will now end this event. However, the work doesn't end. Again, please follow all of us on social media, our website, and email, and we'll definitely be staying in touch to talk about Hawaiian birds. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Mahalo,
you.
everyone.